The moment the palace broke its silence, the air inside Buckingham Palace didn't just feel tense, it felt nuclear. Behind those ancient stone walls, where secrets have survived wars, betrayals, and abdications, a truth finally detonated that insiders claim was never meant to see daylight. The Crown had discovered something buried deep inside Prince Harry's marriage contract, something so devastating, so suffocating, that one senior royal allegedly described it in a single chilling sentence: this wasn't love, this was ownership. And the person who pulled the curtain back wasn't a tabloid, wasn't a journalist, wasn't even a lawyer. It was Princess Anne herself, the one royal known for her ruthless loyalty to the Crown and her terrifying intolerance for deception. Behind closed doors, Anne had reportedly been watching for years, silently studying the slow transformation of Prince Harry, from royal rebel to isolated brand asset. She saw the smiles, she saw the cameras, but she also saw something no one else noticed. Harry wasn't driving the narrative anymore. He was trapped inside it. And when Anne finally uncovered what insiders now call page 14, clause 7, even she, a woman hardened by decades of royal warfare, was said to go completely still. Because this clause didn't just shape Harry's future. It erased his independence. Clause 7 allegedly granted Meghan Markle something no royal spouse had ever possessed before: total intellectual authority over Harry's personal story. His memories, his trauma, his voice, his truth. Every word he spoke, every interview he gave, every book he dreamed of writing, all of it reportedly required her written permission. Imagine that for a moment. A prince born into one of the most powerful bloodlines in human history, unable to speak freely about his own life unless approved by his wife. It wasn't just shocking, it was suffocating. And the deeper Anne looked, the darker it became. Sources claim Harry signed the agreement during one of the most emotionally fragile periods of his life, after abandoning royal duties, after losing the structure that had defined him since birth, after walking away from everything familiar. He was grieving, vulnerable, desperate to protect the one person he believed was protecting him. But insiders now whisper that while Harry thought he was building a new life, Meghan was building a legal fortress, with him sealed inside it. Lady Louise Windsor, Anne's quiet but fiercely intelligent ally, reportedly joined the investigation, dissecting Meghan's corporate empire piece by piece. And what she found wasn't chaos, it was precision. Every company, every trademark, every deal, all structured to stand independently from Harry. Meghan's lifestyle brand, her media contracts, her intellectual property, all registered solely under her control. Harry's name wasn't just absent, it was erased. By the end of 2022, insiders say Harry had become a ghost inside his own empire. The brand depended on his royal identity, his pain, his lineage, his memories, but legally, he owned none of it. He couldn't control it. He couldn't even influence it. He had become the product. And then came the Netflix contract that, buried deep inside its language, was another devastating provision. One that reportedly handed Meghan full editorial control over their shared narrative if the marriage collapsed. Every unseen video, every private confession, every vulnerable moment filmed during their most intimate hours. She could shape it, edit it, release it, or bury it forever. Harry, meanwhile, had signed away his ability to challenge it. The realization hit the palace like a lightning strike. This wasn't just a divorce risk. This was a narrative capture that Princess Anne reportedly walked into Clarence House with the evidence in hand and delivered the truth directly to King Charles and Prince William. No drama, no theatrics. Just cold, brutal clarity. According to insiders, she told them she doesn't just control his present, she controls his past. And if nothing is done, she will control his legacy. The room fell silent. Because this wasn't just about Harry anymore. This was about the monarchy itself, that if Meghan held legal ownership over Harry's story, she held ownership over royal history, over private moments, over institutional memory, over the Crown's narrative continuity. And that was something the monarchy could never allow. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Montecito, Harry remained unaware of just how exposed he truly was. Publicly, he smiled. He attended events. He played the role expected of him. But behind the scenes, insiders claim financial tremors were already shaking his foundation. Legal advisors quietly warned that if divorce proceedings ever began, Harry could lose everything: the Montecito estate, his publishing freedom, his influence over Arkewell, even his ability to publicly defend himself. Because Clause 7 wasn't just a restriction that it was a muzzle, and the timing of Meghan's corporate restructuring only deepened the suspicion. Months before any public marital tension surfaced, Meghan had already separated her legal identity from shared assets. Her trademarks were secured, her companies isolated, her revenue streams untouchable. It wasn't reactive. It was premeditated. That Princess Anne reportedly described it in the most devastating terms possible. This wasn't preparation. This was anticipation. The palace began quietly mobilizing. Legal teams combed through contracts. Royal advisors assessed the constitutional risk. And King Charles authorized confidential reviews of Harry's financial vulnerability. The findings were brutal. Harry no longer controlled the narrative that made him valuable. He couldn't monetize his own experiences. He couldn't speak freely without triggering legal consequences. He couldn't even guarantee his future independence. For the first time in his life, Prince Harry, the boy who once stood behind his mother's coffin in front of the entire world, was powerless. And when word of the clause finally reached him during a private review session arranged by palace intermediaries, insiders say the emotional impact was catastrophic. He wasn't angry, he wasn't furious, he was hollow, completely hollow, because he realized the truth all at once. He hadn't just lost his royal role, he had lost ownership of himself. The man who once broke free from the monarchy had unknowingly stepped into another kind of cage, one built not from duty but from signatures, not from tradition but from contracts. And now, the same institution he escaped was the only force powerful enough to save him. Inside Buckingham Palace, Princess Anne made her position crystal clear. The crown would not allow its bloodline to become commercial property. It would not allow its history to be privately owned. And it would not allow a prince to be silenced inside his own life story. Because this wasn't just a divorce. This was a war for narrative sovereignty. And the crown was preparing to strike back. The breaking point didn't arrive with a headline. It arrived with a whisper, a quiet, devastating realization that Prince Harry was no longer living inside his own story. By the time the palace completed its internal audit, the truth had evolved from suspicion into certainty. Every legal thread, every corporate filing, every contractual signature pointed toward a single terrifying conclusion. Harry's independence hadn't just been weakened. It had been systematically dismantled. Inside Windsor, Harry reportedly sat in silence as Princess Anne placed the final dossier in front of him. Page after page, signature after signature, every agreement he had once believed was harmless now looked like a carefully placed trap. His memoir approvals, his content permissions, his inability to publish without authorization, his absence from ownership structures tied directly to his own identity. It wasn't an accident, it was architecture. And for the first time since walking away from royal life, Harry understood that freedom had come at a price he never saw. Because while he thought he was escaping institutional control, he had unknowingly entered private control. Princess Anne didn't soften the truth. She never did. Insiders claim she told him plainly, "You weren't protected. You were positioned." The words reportedly hung in the air like a verdict. Because Harry wasn't just vulnerable emotionally. He was vulnerable legally, financially, and narratively. Everything he had built since leaving the monarchy was tied into systems he did not control. Meanwhile, outside those palace walls, the external world was already shifting. Quiet moves began unfolding behind closed doors. Legal advisors working under sovereign authority started preparing countermeasures, clauses designed not to destroy Meghan's agreements, but to neutralize their reach over royal history. Because one fact terrified the institution more than anything else: if Meghan retained permanent narrative authority over Harry's experiences, she held leverage over the monarchy itself. That leverage had to end. The Crown's legal minds reportedly drafted a sovereign override framework, an unprecedented declaration asserting that no private agreement could permanently control or restrict narratives rooted in royal lineage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. That at the same time, Harry's physical world was beginning to collapse around him. The Montecito estate, once a symbol of independence, had become a financial pressure point. The loan structures behind the property were far more fragile than the public realized. Payments had tightened, deadlines had approached, and insiders whispered that Meghan had already begun quietly separating herself from financial exposure tied to shared liabilities. It was another calculated move, ensuring her independence remained intact while Harry remained tethered. Even Arcuel, the foundation that had been presented to the world as their shared legacy, no longer operated as a shared entity in practice. Harry's access to internal decisions had reportedly diminished. Key approvals no longer required his authorization. The organization that carried his emotional fingerprints fingerprints had evolved beyond his control. He was becoming irrelevant inside his own creation. And then came the moment that insiders say shattered him completely, that during a private review session arranged by Lady Louise Windsor, Harry examined the exact wording of Clause 7, not as a rumor, not as speculation, but as undeniable legal reality. Every sentence confirmed what he feared. He could not independently tell his story. He could not release new material tied to his life. He could not reclaim his narrative without triggering legal consequences. He had signed away his voice that, according to sources close to Windsor, Harry reportedly asked a single question in that moment, a question so heavy it stunned the room into silence: what part of me is still mine? No one answered immediately. That because the truth was brutal. Very little that Princess Anne, however, was not finished. She had already anticipated this moment. She had already prepared the next move, because while Meghan had built her fortress quietly, Anne had built her counterstrike patiently, and now the crown was ready to act. The monarchy began implementing what insiders described as a narrative firewall, a legal and institutional shield designed to reclaim authority over royal lineage. It was subtle at first. Internal classification shifted. Access protocols tightened. Royal intellectual property protections expanded. Historical archives tied to Harry's royal service were placed under sovereign control, making it impossible for any private contract to fully monopolize those narratives. The message was unmistakable. Harry's story did not belong to private ownership, it belonged to the crown. At the same time, Harry himself was quietly relocated to a secure royal residence under palace supervision. There was no public announcement, no press release, just absence. Montecito went silent. The camera stopped seeing him. The appearances stopped. The illusion began to crack. Meanwhile, Meghan's public strategy shifted into defensive positioning. Her media presence became carefully curated. Her messaging became more controlled. But inside palace circles, the interpretation was clear. Both sides now understood the battle had entered its final phase. This was no longer about marriage, this was about control. Because if the divorce ever became official, the consequences would be catastrophic for Harry. Without sovereign intervention, he risked losing financial leverage, publishing rights, and influence over his own public identity. He could be permanently confined to a version of himself defined by contracts written during his most vulnerable moments. But Princess Anne refused to let that happen. She reportedly pushed King Charles toward the most aggressive institutional protection measures available, legal instruments designed not only to shield the monarchy but to restore Harry's narrative sovereignty. Because Anne understood something others didn't, if Harry remained trapped legally, the crown itself remained vulnerable symbolically. The monarchy could not allow one of its princes to become a licensed commodity. Inside Windsor, Harry began slowly reclaiming something he hadn't possessed in years: clarity. Advisors walked him through every contract, every clause, every vulnerability. And with every revelation, the illusion of his independence collapsed further, but something else emerged in its place. Resolve, because for the first time since leaving royal life, Harry wasn't reacting emotionally. He was thinking strategically. He had believed he was protecting love. Now he understood he needed to protect himself. Insiders say his demeanor transformed. The confusion faded. The emotional fog lifted. He became quieter, but stronger, more deliberate, less reactive, because he now understood the battlefield clearly. This wasn't just about escaping control, it was about reclaiming identity. Princess Anne stood beside him, not emotionally, but institutionally. She didn't offer comfort. She offered strategy. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered protection, because in her eyes, this wasn't just about Harry. It was about legacy. The crown had drawn its line. And Meghan Markle's clause, the clause that had once silenced a prince, was now facing the one force powerful enough to challenge it: the monarchy itself. And as the dust settled across Windsor's ancient halls, one truth became impossible to ignore. For years, Harry had believed he walked away from the crown, but now the crown was the only thing standing between him and losing everything.